Since I have been a reporter, and that's been a long time now, one lawyer, Mark Geragos, has been at the forefront of just about every high profile criminal case in America. And he's always got a very interesting take, even on the cases perhaps that he hasn't had representation in. And so it is that we wanted Mark Geragos to have a seat with me for this episode. Mark, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's always good to be on this podcast as opposed to your day job. So.
Exactly. People don't like the Predators I've Caught podcast in terms of being on it as much as they like to be on this one.
Yeah, I would think that's one that you want to assiduously avoid. So,
although I don't think you've represented any of my Predators.
I've tried not to. So I'll be there. We could have a whole podcast about your belief on various people that are either currently living or dead in the news right now, but I don't think that's what you want to talk about today.
Well, we can talk about all kinds of things. What do you think, by the way, the Epstein case thrust back into the news yesterday with these emails released? Nothing criminal seems to be in there regarding the president or anybody else, really. What strikes me, and I want to hear your take on it, is that Epstein comes off as a master manipulator who knows he's about to get into serious trouble. He dodged a bullet in the earlier criminal case with this house arrest punishment he had. And it looks like he was desperate in his conversations with Michael Wolff and others to try to spin something that might curry him favor. What was your take on it, Mark?
Well, I had this argument with a couple of people yesterday. They're depending on your ideological prism, and I think that the time we live in tends to be more amplified than usual. But it's a perfect example of what I call the difference between direct and circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is, by definition, are there two reasonable interpretations? And when you take a look at some of those emails, Chris, I watched last night commentary from people saying that they were smoking guns, and I watched other people like you just articulated in the way, frankly, where I come from, which it does not look criminal or even conspiratorial. If anything, it looks like somebody, as you said, I think a reasonable interpretation is how do I use somebody, or how do I get to somebody, or how do I get to somebody to do what I need them to do?
Well, exactly. I mean, this case was brewing for so long, and he had, obviously high-powered legal representation in this. And, looking back, it's shocking. And as we know today, it was really the reporting of the Miami Herald and that reporting team down there that really pushes to the forefront and got the Southern District of New York to, the evidence and the witnesses needed to actually prosecute this case. It doesn't seem that this story, the Epstein story, is going away anytime soon. And from an evidentiary standpoint, do you think if they released everything they had on this, do you think it would ever get settled, or do you think this is one of those things that's going to be talked about forever and ever?
It's one of those cases that has traction. It's got a life of its own, and it is now it has leaped over any kind of ability to rationally look at it. And mind you, a lot of the stuff that people are getting worked up about now, today, yesterday, there was things that were from the estate, were things that are not surprising if you were just had a passing familiarity with the trial in the Southern District, for instance. But I've long said that this case, if you wanted to get to the bottom of this case, you would have gone to the civil trials, or they actually weren't trials as much as civil proceedings. That's where all of this stuff was. But there, so far, based on what I have seen, and I suppose it could be, I could be educated on this, depending on what gets released. I don't think that there is what people think there with the DOJ sitting on it. I just don't think that they would have sat on that in a full jury trial, as you mentioned, in the Southern District. That prosecutor, by the way, Maureen Comey, who was now fired, was the prosecutor who tried Diddy's case against my daughter in the Southern District. So having seen Maureen Comey in action, there's no way that I believe that she had access to things that she would not have used in a trial against Maxwell.
Speaking of Diddy, and there are a couple other prosecutions going on now out of the Justice Department, of which are in Virginia, I believe, and we'll get to those in a minute. But as Diddy serves his sentence, and you're familiar with this case because your daughter was one of the defense counsel on the case, were you surprised at the sentence there, or did you think it came in right about where it should be, or where it should be based upon the convictions? And I know there's all this talk about the sentence being higher because of non-convicted charges or non-adjudicated charges. You hear that in circles talking with defense counsel, especially. Do you think it came in right about where it should?
No, I had laid an over and under of 30. I forget if I had said 39 months, but I think it was 39 months, which is the high end of the level that I thought it should have come in at. The reality is he should have been sentenced to somewhere between 21 and 27 months, just if you had done the survey of all of the cases. What you mentioned is what I think is one of the two really good appellate issues, which is use of acquitted conduct, meaning he was found not guilty on the two sex trafficking, he was found not guilty on the RICO, yet the kind of the predicate acts of the RICO and some of the allegations in the sex trafficking were then used for the conviction on the Mann Act. And I've said many times, I suppose tongue in cheek, but there is some truth to it. If you go to Burbank Airport, which is very close to where I'm sitting, on any Friday, and we're taping this on a Friday, and you see the number of people who are waiting for planes to go to Vegas who have sex on their brains, those technically you could get a assistant U.S. attorney to convict them of Mann Act violations. So I've never seen a Mann Act used the way it was used here. It was obviously the kind of the default. It reminds me, the Mann Act was used here in a lot of cases where I see prosecutors use tax counts. They can't get at you for the theft, or they can't get at you for some kind of a conversion related crime. So what do? They then tack on tax counts. And I think that's a very similar thing to what happened here.
Do you think it was a mistake, looking back, for the prosecution to get too far down the road with racketeering charges, in a case where you had one guy as a defendant and you would necessarily need to engage with other criminals to, have an organized crime racketeering event take place?
I'm a huge fan of Dave Chappelle, and Dave Chappelle did a little bit of a shtick on this and said, man, my man Diddy, he is in so much trouble that he's in a RICO with himself. And that's the reaction I had. And by the way, as Judge Subramanian, I think on day one of jury selection, had Mark Agnifilo, who was Tenney's co-lead counsel, call me into chambers and was not happy with the fact that I had said it was the government. I had said on a podcast that the government was a six-pack of white women. And I just think that you're naive. And I had said to the judge in chambers, it's on the record, on the transcript, I said, you've got a Black iconic figure who's being prosecuted for sex acts and including the Mann Act, which is historically, notoriously only used against Black entertainers, going back to Jack Johnson, the famous heavyweight champion, Chuck Berry, and others. And by the way, Charlie Chaplin, who was used against, he was acquitted. But to do that and then have six white women as prosecutors, I just thought the optics of that was horrible. And I will tell you also, the Friday that the trial ended, I was at my office in New York and I was walking the 1.5 miles to where I was staying. And it was Pride Sunday. And I remember telling my daughter on that Sunday, the jury had just gone out, and I don't even think it started deliberating. And I said to Tenny, the what I just saw on the streets of New York on Pride Sunday makes the tapes of the consensual three-way sex that the prosecution used look tame and mundane by comparison. There's no way this jury's going to convict him on sex acts in New York. It was a bridge too far. It was way over the top. And the idea of making a federal case out of this, I just thought was unbelievably naive.
But you see it, and you see it frequently in cases where there have been civil suits, right? In R. Kelly, in this case, and actually in Epstein too. The feds get handed kind of a roadmap for a federal prosecution based on all this work that civil lawyers have done to hold these people responsible for the allegations contained in the complaint. A civil case does not necessarily meet the threshold of a criminal case. Do you think that's part of what was going on here?
I think it was clearly what was going on there. None of the jurors have talked, but I can tell you leading up to the trial that the civil complaint that Cassie had filed was basically a blueprint for what the Southern District prosecutors had used. The big problem that I think the prosecution had in the Southern District is, you mentioned R. Kelly. Well, R. Kelly was famously also prosecuted and convicted, but R. Kelly's case involved minors. Epstein's case involved minors. Diddy's, because of that, because it was the same civil template, in the run-up to the trial, everybody assumed it was also a case involving minors. Everybody assumed that this was kind of the same untoward conduct in the cookie-cutter prosecution. I think that also was a problem. The urban lore about the case, and then when you rolled out the case and it turned out it was two ex long-term girlfriends, and the biggest hurdle that Sean had, frankly, was that tape out of the Intercontinental. He wasn't
the tape was horrible. I mean, it just
horrific.
And that by the way, I think affects, whether it's subconsciously or not, it affects the attitude of law enforcement and prosecutors. Like, look what this guy did. Now, we may not be able to get him on this, but he deserves to get something because of the brutality of this attack. And there's no other way to interpret that video. I mean, it's horrific.
Yeah, it's a prosecution by proxy, as you said. The LA County DA, because it was in LA, said at the time the statute of limitations had expired. The tape itself was used not only to bring the prosecution, because I don't think if that tape had ever been released that the prosecutors would have brought the case. I think it's what caused them to then take the civil template seriously. But also it became cited by His Honor in denying bail after the conviction, in talking about violence. And so even though in the criminal law, and that's why I think that his appeal has some appeal, pun intended, in the criminal law, you're not supposed to prosecute somebody for their status of who they are. You're supposed to deal with what the charges are. Meaning, if somebody is a bad guy, we don't prosecute in America somebody because they're a bad guy. But this really was a case where he was prosecuted because he was viewed as a bad guy.
Hey, Chris Hansen here, and I'm obsessed with Dupe.com because it's a game changer for holiday shopping. I fell in love with this sleek designer lamp for my friend. Perfect vibe, but the $1,200 price tag? Heart attack city. Holiday budgets are tight, and then I found Dupe.com. Typed in the URL and boom, found an identical lamp for $200. Looked just as good, maybe even better. Dupe.com is catching on and helping people save big, and it's so easy. Just go to Dupe.com, paste a product URL or upload a photo, and it instantly finds affordable alternatives. No brand name markup, just the same style for less. Best part is it's 100% free. Why overspend when you can gift more? Dupe.com really is the easiest shopping hack. Just type DUPE.com/, before any product URL in your browser, and boom, it instantly finds you more affordable alternatives. Perfect for gifting. They even have an app and a browser extension you can download. No account required, no sign up required. It's completely free to use. Stop overspending on brand names and start saving on holiday gifts with Dupe.com immediately. As you mentioned, Mark, none of the jurors has spoken publicly, but as you know, sometimes in criminal matters, the defense counsel, the prosecutors will get a chance to poll the jury or talk to the jury in private. Did your daughter, as a lawyer in this case, get a chance to talk to any of the jurors?
No, I think the jurors have worked assiduously to avoid talking. I think I've seen interviews with an alternate, and I know of one of the regular jurors who talked to one news media outlet friend that I have off the record, way off the record. Everything that I've heard from both the alternate juror publicly and privately from the regular juror is completely consistent with kind of the workup that was done prior to the trial. I think there was one of the great kind of lessons, if you're a lawyer or somebody who's interested in trials, is the amount of work that was done prior to that trial in preparation for jury selection, in preparation for how to deal with the witnesses, who should do the cross-examination, who should do the opening, who should do the closing. Those critical decisions are the reason that, even though 50 months I think is way too harsh, probably double what it should have been, it's also why he did not lose his fortune and has a life to come out. He'll be out. If all goes well and there's no more infractions, he's potentially completing that RDAC program. He could be out in a year, 14 months, somewhere in there, 14, 16 months.
You talk about infractions. There have been reports that he's been caught drinking or perhaps smoking weed or other things that obviously aren't allowed in a federal prison. What do you hear on that, and how could that impact his sentence?
Well, I got PTSD when I heard about the phone and the three-ways. I had just come out of a resentencing earlier back in May of this year with the Menendez brothers.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that they did get successful, we were successful. The judge resentenced them. They promptly had a parole hearing, and one of the things that was front and center during those parole hearings were violations for possession of a cell phone. Now, those are in post-conviction matters. It's interesting because I, like you, have been around for longer than either one of us care to admit, and I have vivid memories 10 years ago of the cell phones in the prison system, especially here in California. I mean, there was a time when the exception was an inmate who didn't have a cell phone. And by the way, how do they think the cell phones were getting in there 10 years ago? That was before there were drones that were dropping them in. I hate to cast aspersions, but I think we all know how those cell phones, they weren't walking in by themselves. They had an escort into the prison system, and they were being sold to the prisoners. So I understand the logic. The logic by a parole commissioner is, look, you've got rules. If you can't abide by the rules when you're in prison, then how are we going to trust you to abide by the rules when you're out of prison? I just think it's rather naive. And I think in retrospect, in a year or two, we're going to get to a point. Prisoners have pads. They've got basically what looks like an iPad. They can use those. In this kind of AI unfolding era, the idea that somehow you're going to cut people off and relegate them to a status that makes absolutely no sense. To my mind, remember, 90% or some crazy statistic of these people are eventually going to be out. I would rather that we focus on the skills once they get out, as opposed to telling them to take an unrealistic stance towards getting out in the first place.
Do you think this incident adds time for Diddy?
Yeah, I think they've already, based on what's being reported, and if you go to the inmate locator, it looks like the release date has already been adjusted in some ways. But my understanding is he's in a program that, by the way, it doesn't get enough attention, but in my experience, has been one of the more successful programs implemented in the federal system. The acronym is RDAP, and I think he's enrolled in that. And I know from other clients that I've had, it's wildly successful. And I compare that with pre-conviction style. I used to complain bitterly about these um, rehab centers. I used to call them 30-day or 60-day drive-through centers, and rarely were they successful. But the RDAP program, because it's so intensive, because it's over such a long period of time, seems to have kind of cracked the code, if you will, on how to basically deal with addiction.
But how do you get into somebody who's been so wealthy and so powerful and sort of tiptoed between being a thug and an artist for so long and really live by his own rules? How do you change that behavior? And I guess there is no guarantee that somebody like Diddy gets out and gets into trouble right away. I mean, obviously he'll be on probation, which somebody would get to him and say, look, if you screw this up, you're going to go right back to prison. And this time, it may be for even longer. Sometimes these guys go back on a probation violation, parole violation, for longer than they actually serve for the crime.
So in the federal system, you've got supervised release, and as you've mentioned, supervised release or any kind of post-conviction or post-incarceration release is usually pretty onerous. I mean, you give up basically your Fourth Amendment rights. I think, and I've talked with Sean repeatedly over the course of the year that he's been in custody, this has been basically a timeout that has really impacted him and impacted him, I think, in a favorable way. So it's a humbling experience to go through what he's been through. I've seen it countless times with people who are on top of the world having that society imposed timeout. And there are a number. I used to argue this also about Erik and Lyle Menendez, that when you have, in their case, you had a LWOP situation, life without parole, and their appeals in their case had expired or run their course as of 2005. You had a very binary choice at that point. You can just become, use your term thug, although I sometimes get excoriated for using the term thug, but you could become on the yard with the Nazi lowriders, or you could try to do good work. Both of, in the case of the Menendez brothers, between Erik's starting of the hospice program and Lyle's starting and implementation of the green space program, they made the choice that we want to encourage people to take. And that was over 20 years ago. I was just on before I got on with you. In fact, I was a little late on it. I was talking to somebody who's been in custody for 40 years and doing a prison call. And I was listening to kind of the incredible work that they've been doing with, I would emphasize, no hope of getting out, because life without parole means they're part of that 10% that I talked about that are just warehoused for the rest of their natural life. And that is the toughest decision you'll ever have to make, I would imagine, if you were an inmate. Do I go join a gang and just live that life, or do I try to just kind of course correct and go in the other direction? So Sean, I've known Sean for decades. I think and have great expectations for him, and I will see. Time will tell us.
What did the last conversation sound like when you talked to him, without violating attorney-client privilege? But what did he
Right.
say to you?
I would, my takeaway, without getting into work product or attorney client, because I've represented him so many times over the years, my takeaway is that he seems genuinely on the right path, and that makes me happy. I mean, I had another client who was also a singer who I represented for over a decade, Chris Brown, and I watched Chris's maturation. I mean, when he first came to me back in 2009, he was young. He was very young, and I watched his maturation, and obviously he had missteps too, as most people do. You know, my father, who was my partner and was my hero growing up and was a hard charging prosecutor, used to always tell me, if you want to solve the crime problem, just incarcerate all males between the ages of 16 and 25. Crime will drop dramatically. And there's something to that. I mean, there's a disproportionate amount of crime that is committed by the demographic that is males between 16 to 25. You eventually grow out of that. You eventually kind of change your focus. There's a lot of science about why that is, and I won't bore you with, but I think there's also a sociological component to that.
You know, you bring up Mark, the Menendez brothers, Lyle and Erik, and they were denied parole this last go around. What's the status of that case now, and when do they have another shot at potentially getting out of prison?
So I'm the Pollyannish who still thinks that the governor has on his desk, we did not only a clemency petition, we did a writ of habeas corpus. We then did we did a resentencing petition, which was granted. And as you said, they were denied parole. They were given a 3-year denial. A 3-year denial is the minimum. You can go I think it's 3, 7, 10, 15, whatever it is. But 3-year denial is the minimum. But if you are infraction free, if you do not commit a new infraction, you can petition or you can ask for a hearing again in roughly a year. So on one hand, I think there's the possibility of sometime next summer. On the other hand, I'm still hopeful that Governor Newsom who's taken an interest in the case and he's done a podcast on it that I've watched. He has commented more than once on the case, and he's the one who ordered the safety evaluation, which was before we had them resentenced, which we converted to a parole hearing after they were resentenced. I'm hopeful, that maybe he gets some Christmas spirit. He has not denied the clemency petition yet. It is still on his desk. So there's nothing that compels him to act other than he's seen their good work. He knows what they've done.
But there's nothing to prevent him from acting.
Nothing whatsoever to prevent him from granting clemency.
If you're a homeowner in America, you need to listen to this. The FBI has been warning about a type of real estate fraud on the rise called title theft, and your equity is the target. Here's how it works. Criminals forge your signature on a single document, use a fake notary stamp, and file it with the county. And just like that, on record, they own your home. Using your ownership, they can take out loans against your equity or even sell your property. And you won't know about it until foreclosure or collection notices show up in the mail. That's why I've partnered with Home Title Lock so you can protect your equity and find out today if you're already a victim. Use my promo code Hansen, Hansen, at HomeTitleLock.com, and you'll get a free title history report and a free trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That's 24/7 monitoring of your title records, urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud occurs, their U.S.-based restoration team will spend up to $1 million to fix it. Don't be a victim. Protect your equity today. That's HomeTitleLock.com, promo code Hansen, Hansen, or use the link below. You know, Mark, I want to ask you about two cases that are related because I want to get your take on this. As you know, Leticia James, the Attorney General of New York, was indicted by the Justice Department in Virginia for allegations involving a mortgage on a house. James Comey, the former FBI director, also is now facing criminal charges for allegedly, essentially lying to Congress. Now, we both know that these are, enemies of the Trump administration. We both know that they've been in the sights for some time. Both of their defenses appear to be related to claiming that the U.S. attorney in the district where they were indicted was improperly or is no longer eligible to be appointed or hold that position. Explain that defense to me and what you think are the chances of it being successful.
We've seen a dry run of it. And the dry run is there's 3 U.S. attorneys who have exceeded you can get appointed for 120 days. Alina Habba in New Jersey, all in Nevada, and Bill Asai in the Central District. All 3 of those cases, judges of the district have not appointed those people for beyond the 120 days, which is normally what would happen. And therefore, there are challenges, have been challenges in all 3 cases that every indictment that was brought is infirm, that these people are serving and that they should not serve. So all 3 of those people have faced that challenge. All 3 judges separately have ruled that they can't hold the highest office, which is U.S. attorney, but as they did with Bill here in LA in the Central District. LA is a larger district encompassing 5 counties, I think. They've said he could be the first assistant. What will happen? I'll make a bold prediction. What will happen is that will go to the circuit courts, the next court up, and God only knows what the 3 decisions will be there, but the U.S. Supreme Court will take it, and the U.S. Supreme Court will rule that that is a unconstitutional violation of separation of powers, and that their appointments are lawful, even notwithstanding the Senate confirmation process, that they haven't been Senate confirmed. They're going to say the fact that there is a mechanism where judges could appoint them puts the lie to the need that the executive, namely Trump or the AG, couldn't appoint him. So that same argument is being made with Coney and with Tish James, that Lindsey Allen was not lawfully appointed. It wasn't the 120-day rule, but assorted. She was the only, apparently, if you believe what's reported, the only prosecutor that was in the grand jury. And therefore, if she was unlawfully appointed, the grand jury indictment is infirm. Even if they were to get the win there at the district court level, I would not want to bet on the U.S. Supreme Court countenancing that decision, because I think, given what we've seen in the trend in the U.S. Supreme Court, that they give, obviously, great deference to the executive. All you got to do is take a look at Trump's immunity case. So if you're going to follow the language and the holding in that case, then it makes sense that under this, what's called unitary executive theory, which is trying to say that you can't go in and do a judicial proctology exam on the executive branch. My prediction is that they say, sorry, you can't just, there's no expiration date, so to speak, on the appointments.
So you think the cases continue through the system?
I think the cases continue. I mean, you saw Trish, just looking from the outside. And look, I know most of the lawyers involved, and I know most of the players, and I've known or have met frequently Tish as well, and mentioned that James Comey's daughter, Maureen, was my daughter's adversary in the Diddy case. In fact, when I saw Maureen in the cafeteria, well before James was indicted, I said this could be a battle of the Nepo babies, which I've been excoriated by my daughter multiple times.
I'm sure. Yeah, I get that from my sons as well. Hey, one quick thing I want to go over with you, because I want to get your take on it. There's a case just north of you in Santa Barbara County where a 9-year-old girl has been missing for a month or so. The mother has been the focus of the investigation, Ashley Buzzard. They went on a road trip together. The daughter was disguised and was put in a wig. The mother came back, but not the daughter. It sounds like one of those horrific missing child potential murder cases, yet the police have not prosecuted, at least on the missing girl case, the mother here. Have you been following that, and what's your take on that?
I have been following it. I was hoping you would ask because you, of all people, in my humble opinion, are the perfect person to opine on this. When I was asked about this, I don't know, 2 weeks ago,
Sure.
whenever it happened, I said this has all the earmarks to me, all the indicia of a custody dispute where you've got a mother who is taking, because I was just putting it together from this. I was told she drove to the border. I was told she drove with the child, that she then came back without the child. And I said, look, there's got to be or there arguably is a strong chance that there is a father in the mix. There's a strong chance that there is a custody issue. If somebody's driving with their kid to the border and then coming back without the kid, that does not sound to me like somebody who is selling their kid. That sounds like somebody who is disguising their kid, taking it to somebody who they trust to drop off the kid to, and then coming back because they're trying to avoid a custody or a nasty kind of breakup situation. I believe that also is what informs or explains why the police have not prosecuted or arrested her for something involving her daughter. What they have prosecuted her for is that a false imprisonment on somebody who is, at least if you believe what's reported, somebody who was connected to the search, and she said, you can't leave my house because they were there. I think that also was law enforcement's way of trying to put her into custody in order to get her to say something that normally she wouldn't say if she wasn't in custody. You know better than I, although I could make some jokes about it. People tend to talk when they shouldn't talk.
Sure.
Which you've got a kind of a track record.
I've made a living out of it. Yeah.
I was going to say you've made a career out of it, but I didn't want to. You're very talented. Other than that, so.
I appreciate it. I honestly think that makes sense to me because that would explain perhaps the lack of urgency on the part of law enforcement. And I honestly have not reported much on this. I will, based upon this conversation. I'll start digging around a little bit, but I think that makes sense that we're looking at more of a custody battle where they have some sense that the child may be alive and cared for, as opposed to being tortured or sold in a human trafficking. Let's hope that's the case and not that this child is
I think that's
to me that's the best case scenario here.
Right, the best case scenario. Also, by the way, when people are saying, well, then why haven't the police gone and found her? Why did that? Maybe the police already know that where she is. Maybe they think, hey, this woman, by all accounts, the accused she's having some mental health issues. It might be better to leave the child where the child is if the child is safe, and obviously the mother thought so. And absent a court order on custody, there is no violation. I mean, I will once again invoke my father, who used to say, I'd rather sell oranges on the side of the freeway than do family law. And this is precisely the reason. It takes, seemingly good people, and it drives them insane.
Mark Geragos, thank you for having a seat with me. I appreciate it. And let's have you back again soon. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm going to look forward to you digging into that case.
Yeah, I will. I'll get right on that, and I'll get back with you, and we'll have you back on very soon. I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Geragos, always a great insight. When you think about all the cases that he has worked on over the years, it's really stunning. We didn't even get into Michael Jackson or some of the others that there are some updates on. But thank you for joining. We appreciate it. Don't forget Predators I've Caught, my other podcast that drops every Monday. Thank you for having a seat with me. And check out True Blue, my streaming crime network. New episodes of Takedown with Chris Hansen. Our Predator investigations drop every single Thursday. If you haven't watched, check out, subscribe. Go to watchtrueblue.com. That's TRUBLU. We also have a YouTube channel. You can follow me on social media, at Chris Hansen on X, official Chris Hansen on Instagram, and have a seat with Chris Hansen on TikTok. I think I might hold the record for the oldest guy with 860,000 followers. We'll see. Cameo, should you desire. We'll see you next week on Have a Seat. I'll be watching.